Welcome to Photography Tips Friday, where you are going to learn about ISO on your DSLR. If you are just coming across this as your first video of my series, then you are going to want to go back and watch the first one, which I will link up here, and that is the introduction of a DSLR camera, basically the settings and their functionality. And I'll also link a couple of videos at the end as well, shutter speed and aperture. They are two of the components of the photography lighting triangle, and ISO, which we are learning today, is the third component. This series of videos is all about learning the basics of your DSLR camera and the fundamentals of a professional looking picture. Whether you are a Nikon or Canon user, this video is for you. So if you are excited to learn about ISO today, or you're like, what the heck is ISO? Give us a thumbs up and we will get cracking and learning what it is. Oh, and don't forget, hit the subscribe button right here so that you get notified every time I post a camera tutorial video, which is every Friday. So as mentioned in my other camera tutorial videos, we are talking about manual settings. And I talk about manual settings because I think it's a good idea to be able to manipulate the settings yourself. Auto settings, they predict what they think your camera needs, and I don't think it's always accurate. So again, ISO is another setting that we can manipulate to bring in more light. But before we go into the important stuff, I'm going to geek out for a second.
ISO is an international standard organization. Do we really need to know that? And the answer is no. So now that you know what ISO stands for, throw it away and let's learn the real stuff.
ISO is all about the sensitivity to light. It's about how sensitive the camera is to the light being let in. I've mentioned before how I will be covering in future videos 7 steps to taking the perfect picture, and ISO is step number 4. It used to be step number 2, but as you'll learn in the other 2 videos, shutter speed and aperture, they are now 2 and 3 because they are really the primary focus of what your image is about. Shutter speed is about movement and aperture is about depth of field. ISO is basically topping up the light that you don't receive with the other 2 settings. So like shutter speed and aperture, the settings are measured with numbers. So with ISO, the bigger the number means you're letting in more light, but it also means that your image is going to potentially be super grainy. On the other end of the spectrum, if your number is low, it means that you're not letting enough light in, but your image will be less grainy, it'll be a better quality, and it'll be just crisp and clear. Your camera dictates the range of ISO. So for example, my camera, the 5D Mark III, goes all the way up to 25,600. Now I've never gone to that capability, but it just gives me a wider range to play with. So my first camera, which was, well, it was a British camera, but I guess it's the equivalent to a Canadian Canon Rebel. It only went up to 6,400. So if I was to use, let's just say ISO 2000 on my Rebel camera, I would probably get a really grainy picture because I don't have as much range to play with. However, if I use ISO 2000 on my 5D Mark III, you probably wouldn't even tell that I used a higher number. So speaking of grain, it isn't very noticeable unless you're enlarging images, to a really big size. Or if your image is super dark as well, grain might be more noticeable then. There are going to be times where using your lighting triangle just isn't enough light, and the only way to create the right light is to bring in external light. So for example, when I was shooting weddings, maybe I was in a dark church, I had my aperture as low as it would go, I had my shutter speed as low as it would go, keeping stability, and then my ISO I would crank up enough without creating grain. Sometimes it was still too dark, and my only option was to either add a flash or to go even more up with my ISO. Now, sometimes you can use grain as a creative effect. Adding grain could potentially make it look like a vintage image, which is pretty cool these days, right? As I mentioned before, these camera tutorials are very technical, but I don't want it to come away from your creativity. So there's lots of rules to be learned within photography, but I say rules are made to be broken, so make sure you break them and get creative. Photography is the art of light. Photography is art, and art is subjective. So you can create whatever image you want by breaking these rules. So if you learned a lot or you found this video helpful, please give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified every time we post a new video. And you are going to want to learn more because there's so much more to learn. So more videos coming every Friday. So I guess I will see you next Friday.
The camera that you have dictates.
Your camera dictates.